Good evening, everybody watching on video, everybody here in person. It's good to have you all here as we get to another saint study, and I owe you an apology too, because I told you we'd maybe have a few more weeks. We're only going to have one more after this. We have a need for a church service to be covered in Valley City in 2 weeks, and I was thinking maybe that was going to be our last class session, but because of the church service that I was asked to cover, we will make next week our final class for the summer. And my encouragement to you is just keep learning and keep studying, and we'll have a fun last one next week. Tonight, though, we have two saints. One of them maybe you're not as familiar with, but has some pretty big importance within the last 2 decades. And then the other one, I'm guessing you're more familiar with. So without further ado, we will turn our attention to the wall up here and watch our first video on Saint Hildegard. Hildegard. I'll get the light for you so you can see this a little bit.
Welcome to Saints and Feasts of the Catholic Calendar, meeting the greatest men and women who have ever lived. September 17th, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, Virgin and Doctor, 1098 to 1179, patroness of philologists. A one-woman magisterium orchestrates a life in tune with the Creator. In the high Middle Ages, she was New Age. Before farm to table was a term, she lived organically. Before alternative medicine was de rigueur, she cataloged the medicinal benefits of herbs, plants, minerals, and potions. And before anyone ever went green to save planet Earth, she talked about the viriditas, or greenness of God, meaning how his graces watered a desiccated soul until it flowered with fresh green life. Hildegard of Bingen was far, far ahead of her time, even though from an external perspective, she lived the austere, rigorous, cloistered life common to the female religious of her era. Hildegard was born in the Rhineland, the very western region of modern Germany, to a minor noble family. Her mother and father placed her in the care of a well-known local abbess for her education at the tender age of 8, where she learned Latin and the teachings of the Catholic religion. Her world deepened and broadened inside the 4 walls of her simple Benedictine convent. When her mentor died, Hildegard became the abbess and soon moved the convent, generating some tension in the process, to a new location where it could better flourish as her fame attracted more and more notice and vocations. Hildegard was unusual for her time. She was unusual, in fact, for any time. She was a polymath with eclectic interests in numerous fields of study. She was a sophisticated and prolific composer of sacred music whose voluminous works surpassed the output of almost any other medieval musician. She had an advanced understanding of medicine and the human body, including an almost complete knowledge of how blood circulated in the body. 4 centuries before such knowledge was verified through post-mortem studies. Hildegard also had detailed knowledge of animal and plant life, of rocks, reptiles, fish, and the natural sciences in general. Yet if she must be known for one thing above all, it must be for her pyrotechnic visions of God and the cosmos. Hildegard's colorful visions are difficult to classify. She described them as a wide-awake spiritual awareness of the reflection of the living light. From childhood, she felt her entire body, bones, nerves, veins, senses, all rising ever higher into the vault of heaven, where she experienced all of creation in its particularity and in its oneness. These were not ecstasies or physical transportations, but an eyes wide open, all sensory experience of sermons, virtues, writings, and other human actions, as if they were shimmering like the sun on the mirror-like surface of a lake. The overarching theme of these visions was the mystical marriage between God and his creation through the incarnation of Jesus Christ, a union consummated on the cross, where Christ makes his bride, the church, fertile for humanity. As Hildegard's writings became more well known, the Pope was asked for his appreciation of their theological orthodoxy or heterodoxy. Pope Eugene III approved of Hildegard's description of her visions, with a prudent warning for Hildegard to avoid any pride in being so blessed. The great Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, a famous contemporary of Hildegard, was also asked his opinion about her writings, and the two exchanged letters. In fact, many people, both humble and exalted, corresponded with Hildegard, leaving behind one of the most massive caches of extant letters from medieval times. In the last years of her life, despite worsening health, Hildegard's prestige was such that she was given permission to leave her convent in order to preach in town squares and churches, something almost unheard of for a woman of her era. She died in the odor of sanctity on September 17th, 1179, the day on which her liturgical memorial is celebrated today. In the 2012 papal bull declaring her a doctor of the Church, Pope Benedict XVI wrote that the corpus of her writings, for their quality, quantity, and variety of interests, is unmatched by any other female author of the Middle Ages. Saint Hildegard, your creative and versatile soul brought a feminine genius to the Church's theological and spiritual patrimony, using poetic and symbolic language to express the mysteries and richness of God and His creation. Inspire all Christians to read creation like a book of divine life. Amen.
Tammy, do you want to grab the lights, please? I start to get stuff wrapped up with the video. Yeah, her body is buried at a convent, or was at a convent in Germany.
Where's the switch?
Light switch is on the wall in there. You see it by the coat rack there? All right. Straight ahead.
Straight ahead.
Thank you. All right. Well, we've got a few more people here who haven't been with some of our studies. Sorry about the little video controller there. I don't know why it didn't go away.
That's okay. I can see how long it's still on.
Suppose there's a silver lining with it. One of the reasons we're watching the videos is because there's a lot of information with any one of these saints that we could study. The videos at the very least just give you a nice summary. Granted, they're not made by Wells Confessional Lutherans. They are made by Roman Catholics at times. We watched a few other people. There's the one guy, drive-through history guy, who's more like an Indiana Jones. He just likes history. The last few have been more on this sort of channel, where it's specifically from a Catholic point of view, how they view a saint. And I said at the beginning of when we started this in June, it's good for us to hear how they talk about it, or even to hear those prayers, because we talked about it, I think, in our first class. It's kind of strange to us. It's weird. Like hearing them pray to a saint. We've talked about that at length with, why don't we just go to Jesus with that prayer instead? They view things differently. So some of that will come up then when we get into Hildegard. Before we jump into the reading of the sheet here, it was mentioned in the video that she was something called a mystic. Have you heard that term before? A mystic. Usually when we think of something mystical, maybe you think of something like, Camelot, King Arthur, maybe something like unicorns. Yeah. Merlin, yeah. You're thinking stuff of fables, right? In the Catholic Church, or in the medieval church specifically, there was a time, there was a movement called mysticism. And the book had a little description of what mysticism is. It titles it as Saints of Vision and Ecstasy. Mysticism produced some of the most famous and controversial saints in the Christian tradition. The mystic's experience is by definition private, though certain effects, such as coma-like sleep, can be observed. The occasionally fantastic reports of these trances of ecstasy, visions, and miracles can both frighten and arouse suspicion and led to ridicule for more than one of the following saints. A few, including Bridget of Sweden and Joan of Arc, were even accused of heresy. So Joan of Arc, we'll talk about her next week. She was accused of, I don't know if being a witch of that kind of line, because she claimed to have visions like a mystic would. Mystics seem to attract miracles or legends of miracles. Many mystics have been seen to levitate. Joseph of Cupertino levitated so frequently that he became known as the Flying Friar. It's not the flying nun, the flying friar. Others seem to give off a sweet scent, even in death. Yet mystics are unique in their ability to experience the divine personally, and it is perhaps for this reason that mystics, in particular, exhibit signs of divine favor, such as the holy light that shone from the face of St. Francis of Rome as she died, or more commonly, the stigmata, one of the most unusual features of Christian mysticism. We've talked about the stigmata too before in this class. The idea that the marks of Jesus' nail holes on his hands or his wrists and his feet, or even like marks from the crown of thorns, appear on your body because you are so spiritually connected to him. Now, supposedly this stuff happens. Whether or not it does, I guess, it mentions skepticism. There's a lot of that with that. I think we probably would approach it with that. I'll just tell you, weird stuff happens in the world, and we can't always explain it.
Did I miss it?
Sorry, go ahead.
Was there a sign? Did she have a sign that she was a mystic other than what she said about the vision?
Other than her visions, not really. She seemed very affluent, or like able to talk about God in a higher way than most normal people were back then. Especially, we're medieval times here, or even before that. This is back in the Dark Ages when people weren't so smart. They weren't educated yet. When you get to the age of the Enlightenment, things change. You get to the 1700s, the 1800s. Things start to switch towards people are smart. They can think for themselves. We're still in the era right now with the mystics where people are inspired and their attention is caught by this. Whereas we live in an age of skepticism where it's like, yeah, right. I'm sorry, what was your original question?
I was just wondering if anybody could talk about a glowing face or stigmata, like mystics had signs. I was wondering if she had any sign other than her words.
Well, why don't we dive into that sheet that's you have there, and then we'll see maybe if anything else will pop out. Other than what they already described, I don't know of anything else that Hildegard is known for vision-wise or mystic-wise.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
They mentioned polymath.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
I'm going to assume it means she's really good at math, but that's my very crass way of looking at it.
Okay.
Cindy, do you know what it means?
Well, it's more like they said, she knew about medicine and she knew about.
Oh, yes.
She was just so broadly.
A well-rounded individual. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I
Not
found it
even
interesting.
well-rounded, but up there in the top level in everything that she did.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Person
I
whose
appreciate it.
knowledge and expertise span multiple diverse subjects.
Okay, yeah, so you had a good description of it. Thank you. Don't listen to the pastor when you ask for a
That's
definition.
Google, I'm sorry.
So go ahead, Jan, sorry.
I was just going to say I found it interesting that she was really into natural medicine, through herbs and like a lot of things are going back to that now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're finding that those things really do work.
Yeah, there tends to be that kind of swinging of a pendulum in history where, we go reasonable science, we go proof and, in lab stuff, and then it starts to swing back the other direction like now where the other side is starting to get more of a voice now too. And then it'll go back the other way again, and, and that happens in history a lot.
Yeah,
At that time, that's all they had.
That's all they had, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's a very good point. All right, let's read our sheet here. St. Hildegard of Bingen was a Benedictine nun, a theologian who saw visions all her life. From age 8, she studied with a reclusive nun named Jutta, the mother superior of the convent at Diesenberg, succeeding her as superior when Jutta died in 1136. In 1150, she moved her convent to Rupertsberg near Bingen, and soon afterward assumed leadership of Eibingen Abbey. I'll make this note too. You hear that mentioned she's a Benedictine nun. We looked at St. Benedict a couple weeks ago. He's the one who really starts to set the tone for what monasteries are going to be like. You think of the guys walking around in their habits, their robes, and then, they're all holy and they're praying all the time. He's really the guy who starts to lay down the rules for that, and then it has an effect that carries over into the convents with the nuns, too. The reason we think about a problem like Maria, and Sound of Music is because there's a certain image that comes all the way from Benedict. The idea of you are going to pray, you're going to be a holy person, but you're also going to work. And those were the two things we talked about with Benedict. It's prayer and work. Those are the two things that he kind of sets the tone for monasticism, which of course then with Luther, we know that didn't work so well for him. He almost worked himself to death. Hildegard did not promulgate her visions until she was 40 years old. Blessed Pope Eugene III declared them legitimate and authentic visions from God. I suppose, Patty, we can keep that in mind for our discussion later. We're going to have more discussion after class about something too, so just thinking about that. Thus encouraged, Hildegard composed her most famous works, Scivias, the one who knows the ways of God, whose reputation earned her the appellation Sibyl of the Rhine. Hildegard had been portrayed as an early feminist for her espousal of gender equality and her defense of Eve. She did not shy away from voicing her strong, often uncomplimentary opinions about church reform and morality to the Pope, King Henry II of England, or Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. I think this is a reason why Saint Pope Benedict, was it 2012 it was mentioned, he had some coin commemorated with her on it. I don't find it... it is a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, I should say. I can't talk. That you have that happening in an era where feminism is on the rise. 2012, well, yeah, you're looking for a saint like that in the Catholic Church to kind of save face with the feminist crowd. It's a political move as well as a religious one. Efforts to canonize Hildegard failed for reasons unknown in the 13th and 14th centuries, but church authorities added her name to the Roman martyrology and her cult, active in Germany virtually since her death, won papal approval. Apparently she is not the patron saint of anything, though.
Not a saint, they canonize her.
It does say they did informally, which is interesting to me because throughout this book, some of the other sheets and saints we've looked at, there was a time where before there was a standardized process, someone could still be a saint. So like St. Augustine or St. Jerome, they didn't have the canon process set up yet where you have to have 2 miracles. You have to prove that if someone prayed to you, you were able to intercede for them, that sort of stuff. They've got their checklist now. It intrigues me that Hildegard sort of skirted that issue and didn't have to go through the test then. Shows how hard and fast those rules are. All right.
She lived a long time for that.
Yes, she did. For that
time of history.
For that era, yeah.
81.
Something like 30, 40 years ago, for a variety of reasons, Gregorian chant became part of the pop charts.
Oh, yeah.
And at some point, somebody discovered that, hey, this chick wrote all this music. And it was as good or better than all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hers. So, and some great stuff.
So circling back then to Gloria's question, I think that plays into it in our talk about the polymath definition. What is actually true about her? She seems like a superwoman, sort of. She can do anything, and she can, tell the man what's going on and voice her opinion and that sort of thing. And that's always going to be a good question for us to ask with any of these legends. What's actually true about them? I mean, we're going to have Francis in a few moments, and he's got some things I think that would have fit the 1960s at Woodstock. So there are things that maybe are true, regardless of whether they're true or not. This person's famous, and so at the very least, it's good for us to be aware of them. Anything else on Hildegard? Any questions or anything? I guess if you see that question sheet, that's for your note-taking purposes. We don't necessarily have to go through each question, but if there's something that you think, hey, this is worth bringing up, or it's just there to spark conversation.
The sheet mentions a cult.
A what?
A cult.
Yeah, where was that mentioned?
Very end, yes. Last sentence in the front, right here.
Roman martyrology and a cult. What cult?
Sometimes certain saints get a following, and it's kind of like going viral today, which is probably not the best comparison, but it kind of works. Like they get real popular for a certain reason for a time, and then they've got a specific following. So like this maybe isn't the best example, but St. Jerome, we talked about, he's the patron saint of librarians. Let's imagine that libraries go all the rage in America all of a sudden, and the Catholic Church says, hey, there's this patron saint of libraries. Well, then there's all of a sudden a new cult that's falling around St. Jerome. So it sometimes comes in waves like that too.
It's not saying that she was part of a cult. Is that
No.
she has
Like a devoted following to her.
Okay.
yeah.
I'm interested. It's interesting that she was able to use her gifts in a time where
Sure.
women were not
Dismissed.
I mean, barefoot and pregnant, pretty much,
Mm-hmm.
is the way women got it at that time. And she was, evidently, she was a brilliant person.
I'm very curious to hear her defense of Eve. I'd be curious what the rationale is for her argument.
Eve is blamed for sin.
Right, and I'm guessing she's got some philosophical approach to it, because typically around this time in history, a lot of the arguments are very, philosophical, very.
It doesn't really talk about her relationship to Christ, though, and what
No,
she
it
believes
doesn't.
about Christ and redemption and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really talk about that. It just says she
Yeah.
was smart and she saw visions.
Yeah, other than the vision stuff, there really isn't much mention of her connection to the Lord at all.
But you have to read what she wrote.
Right, yeah. Yeah, putting best construction on it, she probably talks about that to a degree.
Was she extremely wealthy?
S-
From a wealthy family?
It doesn't appear that way. I don't know if it was mentioned in the video, but
Said she was from a like a minor duchy. Yeah.
yeah, so like a lower level lord
Yeah.
family.
Minor
So
lord,
maybe
that's-
well off, better off than
For
others.
her education.
Yeah.
For a woman who
Mhm.
might be from a very privileged.
Right. Yeah. You have some sort of background in bringing that into the convent maybe helped her.
And a lot of the families, upper families, the first son got the castle, and the second
Right.
son went in the army, and anybody after that,
Who did we talk about last
dumped him
week?
in a monastery.
Well, they dumped her at 8
Yeah.
into the nunnery or whatever it was.
Yeah. Very typical back then.
At that point in history, if, for instance, you had been married, your husband died, you had no property that was passed specifically to you, if you didn't want to live on the street, you went into a convent. If you were a daughter and the father did not have money for a dowry, he would send you to a convent, problem solved. Some went in for religious purposes, but
Became a
it was
convenient
very
place.
different.
Yeah.
It was a solution to different problems. She went
Yeah.
in at 8. That's not odd for the time.
That was
Even boys,
right.
put him,
Yeah.
put him
Man.
in a monastery, at least they'll get an education.
Yeah. Otherwise, you got to keep feeding them.
It kind of solved
Yep.
homelessness.
Hmm. Yeah. In some ways, it did. In other ways, it put guys who maybe shouldn't be in the pulpit
Right.
with no training, in front of people. They're the holy guys. Well, those holy guys don't know a whole lot. So.
Well, the monks were not necessarily in a lot of times, especially
Okay,
at the
gotcha.
beginnings of the monasteries, they were not priests, and they were
Right.
not trained as priests, and they didn't serve as priests.
Right.
They were just the
But for you, the lay person looking at them, you'd say they're the holy guys, and well,
sort of.
sort of. All right, that's what I got on Hildegard. I'd say we've done good with that saint. Before we go on to Saint Francis, I'll just say this: as we transition in this conversation about mysticism, mysticism is kind of a hard thing to pin down, because if you're going to ask me for like a hard definition of it's someone who has this many visions, talks in this many tongues, or has this many stigmata encounters, there isn't really a fast rule for it. There isn't something that we'd say they fall into this category. It was a time period, or it was a certain kind of person who fit the bill, so to speak. But it was mentioned in Hildegard's stuff too. There were those who suspected this, even back then, where it's like, I don't know, this is kind of odd stuff. But all right, let's go on to Francis. Thank you, Dan.
Welcome to Saints and Feasts of the Catholic Calendar, meeting the greatest men and women who have ever lived. October 4th, St. Francis of Assisi, 1182 to 1226. Patron saint of animals, ecology, and merchants, co-patron of Italy. A merchant's son of eccentric sensibilities goes radical. Though originally baptized by his mother as Giovanni or John, in honor of St. John the Baptist, today's saint was renamed to Francesco or Frenchy by his father Pietro de Bernardone, after Pietro returned home from trading in France. Pietro loved France, and his son's romantic troubadour spirit likely flowed from that same cultural source. Francesco grew up in a middle-class home that engaged in the sale of fine cloth. Francis was a skilled merchant in the family business, but he enjoyed spending money more than earning it. He was a man about town, a leader among his friends, and well-liked for his concern for others. He was also a failed knight. When he was 20, Francis joined a civic-minded Assisi militia in a battle against a neighboring city. When the militia was routed, Francis was spared death and instead held for ransom due to his fine livery. He was held prisoner in a rank dungeon for a year before the ransom was paid. He returned to Assisi a more reflective man. Subsequent military service for the Papal States ended abruptly when Francis heard a voice tell him, "Follow the master rather than the man." He sold his expensive armor and horse, returned home, and began to spend hours in prayer. Shortly after this turning point, Francis met a leper on the outskirts of Assisi. He initially recoiled, but then dismounted, gave the man some money, and kissed his putrid hand. This was the start of his frequent visits to leper houses and hospitals. When Francis heard a voice from the cross say to him, "Francis, go and repair my church, which as you can see is in ruins," he sold a large amount of cloth and his father's horse at a neighboring market town. Coming back to Assisi, he donated the proceeds to a priest at the church of San Damiano on the outskirts of Assisi. Francis's father was irate. His son had sold cloth from the family store and a horse, and had given away money that was not his. This was stealing, and Francis was put in prison. A dramatic scene then unfolds between Francis and his father in a church square, in the presence of Bishop Guido of Assisi and his court. Pietro demands the return of his money. The bishop supports him and says the church cannot accept stolen money. Francis returns the coins. But then Francis goes further. Piece by piece, he removes his clothing until he is naked before everyone's eyes. He then says, "From now on, I will not say my father, Pietro Bernardone, but our Father who art in heaven." There is not a single reference in any contemporary Franciscan document to Pietro after this dramatic incident. Francis was now cut off, disinherited, and on his own. Francis eventually begins to wear a rough smock which he ties around his waist with a cord. He lives alone in absolute poverty, prays, helps the sick, rebuilds nearby rundown chapels, and preaches and begs in Assisi. Men begin to follow his lead, and the first fire of the worldwide Franciscan order ignites. The Lesser Brothers of Assisi is recognized by the Pope. Francis is ordained a deacon, and the order's explosive growth can only be called miraculous. St. Francis is the first great founder of a religious order since St. Benedict in the 500s. By sheer allure of personality, holiness, and vision, not intellect or organizational skill, he imparted a mysteriously powerful charisma to his followers. He was ardent in his love for the Holy Eucharist and insisted that churches be well kept in honor of the Lord's physical presence. Francis died in his 44th year and was canonized just 2 years later in 1228. St. Francis may be the most well-known person of the second millennium. A measure of his massive impact can be gauged by observing that it is not uncommon for St. Francis to be seen as the ideal of Christian virtue and poverty, even over and above the religion's very founder. St. Francis of Assisi, You held the Holy Eucharist in such holy reverence, you dared not be ordained a priest. Your love of the Word of God complemented your love of His creation. Help all Christians to have your same balance of love for God, the sacraments, and all God's creation. Amen.
Alrighty. There's that one. So, hoping I get a large show of hands, but have you ever seen in someone's garden a statue of St. Francis? Yeah, if you're ever walking around in one of the neighborhoods around here, look for one, because chances are you will find him. He is associated with nature for his peace-loving attitude, and we're going to talk about his relationship with animals too. So when I think like 1960s hippie vibes, I mean, he kind of fits that mold of, like, hey, let's just all get along. That's a reason why Pope Francis chose the name Francis, because he really wanted to reflect that same spirit of St. Francis. All right, why don't we dive into the reading before we talk a little bit more. St. Francis of Assisi. As a youth, Francis betrayed remarkably little of his future sanctity. His thoughts turned to religious contemplation after he was wounded in battle in 1201 and spent a year in captivity. While praying at San Damiano, a small neglected church in Assisi, Francis received divine auditory instruction. From a crucifix mounted in the church issued the command, "Go and repair my house, which you see is falling down." So Francis, I don't know that he's technically a mystic, but he could fall into that same category with this sort of calling. The crucifix is talking to him. Under church repairs there, Francis took the injunction literally and sold his father's possessions to rebuild the church. Battling with his father, Francis renounced his inheritance, took a vow of poverty, even stripped off his clothing. Yet his extraordinarily charismatic yet humble personality soon attracted followers, and in 1210, Francis wrote the first rule for his little order, emphasizing obedience, poverty, and orthodoxy. Around 1211, after a trip to Rome, the friars made crude homes in Porjicola, near Assisi. They traveled incessantly, preaching and living as laborers, farmers, and occasionally beggars. They distinguished themselves through their steadfast devotion to poverty. Because they were utterly dedicated locals who could cement opinions among the poor and uneducated, the church, in turn, effectively used the Franciscans to counter heresy. Francis' later life. Francis attempted to travel to Syria and then Morocco to convert Muslims, but circumstances frustrated him. Eventually, in 1218 or 1219, Sultan al-Kamil received him gracefully but refused to convert. Returning to Italy in 1220, St. Francis found his order in chaos. The Franciscans, now numbering more than 5,000, needed leadership and organization, and Francis, humbly recognizing that he did not possess these abilities, stepped down as vicar general. Francis had a remarkable, mystical experience in 1224 when he saw a fiery six-winged seraph and the crucified Christ. Walking, he discovered Stigmata, the first verified account. In 1225, Francis composed the song Canticle of Brother Sun, still popular today. I don't know that one. Although only 45, Francis was infirm, nearly blind, and ill. He died in Assisi in 1226. St. Francis and the animals. Francis's rapport with animals and love for nature are well known. He hoped the Holy Roman Emperor would enact an animal welfare law. One legend claims Francis taming a ravening wolf by insisting that townspeople feed the beast, whose terrorizing had been dictated by hunger. The townsfolk even buried the animal in their church. In artwork, Francis is often attended by birds, which several sources say came to hear him preach. So, it's a regular Disney princess from the sounds of it. That's what I think of when I think of the animals running around him.
Seeing his preaching was for birds.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
No, we got one over at church.
Oh, yeah.
We looked up and there's this bird sitting right in the window.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, when you see the statues of Francis, you often do see animals around him. He's patron saint of animals, birds especially. I Let's read that 3 Franciscan orders at the top there. In addition to the first order of mendicant monks, Francis formed a tertiary order for which he wrote a rule in 1221. This so-called third order did not take vows, but was dedicated to the Franciscan ideal. St. Clare of Assisi, a noblewoman devoted to Francis and who renounced worldly life in order to form an order of nuns, formed the second order. As the first order spread throughout Europe, so did the second order, better known after its founder as the Poor Clares. So you got a picture of her there on the right. He is very, very highly regarded by the Catholic Church. So, I mean, if there's ever a saint you could walk away from this class just having in your back pocket and some knowledge about, Francis is probably one of the ones you could spend some time on. Yeah?
What was so noble about selling his father's thing and giving it to the poor? I mean,
So there was this idea, especially with like the guys who would go into the monastery or form their own groups, that cutting yourself off from possessions, giving them up, going into the desert, becoming a hermit, that gets you closer to God, or at the very least helps you resist temptation for some of them.
even if it's giving others possessions?
Well, he went to jail for that though, right?
Right, his dad wasn't happy.
Like, that's why they thought he was so loving and giving at first, because he sold his father's things and gave them.
Right.
Right.
And I'm like, I feel like it would mean more if it was his own.
Yeah. Where's the line for stealing there? I suppose he'd say, well, I was supporting others. Okay, well, use your own money then.
His father had probably outfitted him when he was a soldier.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
His father probably produced the horse and the armor and
Yeah, so it'd be kind of along the same lines as fasting. Like if I'm giving up all these possessions that are mine, even though they weren't technically his, I am somehow doing a good thing. God's going to give me a pat on the back. I'm going to advance and be a holier man in life, get closer to God. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that they look at it. We find out, though, like for Luther, he did the exact same thing. It wasn't necessarily a taking dad's stuff and selling it, but when he went into the Augustinian monastery, he took all his lawyer stuff and gave it to his friends, which I don't know if you know the black and white Luther film from, I don't remember when it was from. We watched it last year. That's how the movie starts. Yeah, Luther is giving away his stuff because he's about to enter the monastery. He's got his big, book of the law, or no, not law book, because he keeps that actually, but other stuff that he's getting rid of because he doesn't need it anymore. Because he thinks getting rid of this stuff, going into the monastery, that's going to help me with my God problem right now. And he found out it didn't. Anything else on Francis? Any notes you have?
Isn't that the one, is he the guy that they have, some of the churches have like a day you can bring your animals to church to be blessed?
For a blessing. Yep. I believe so. Yep.
I don't think it would help my dog any.
Might.
He was really fast. I had to rush him. Got into the garage, tried to jump in the car.
Huh?
He doesn't like the hot weather. He's really able to walk.
I suppose I sort of say tongue in cheek, animal of the blessing, or blessing of the animals, because we as Lutherans just don't do that. I will say that I was just listening to something this morning in prep for the sermon this week. Having a pastor come into your home and bless your home is not a bad thing. It's maybe just not something we typically do, but we ask God to bless our church. Why can't we do it for your house? Same thing for your animals, I would say. I'm not guaranteeing we'll solve all their problems, but
Animals don't have souls. So.
right, and so your home doesn't either, I suppose, is the argument there. May the Lord watch over your animal while you have it. It's so some people really want that though, and all the power to them. That they want God to watch over their animals. Okay, I suppose. Yeah, in that case, that makes a little bit more tangible sense of my livelihood depends on these animals, whereas Shiloh or Vader, it's okay, well, maybe they need a blessing at times, but
it makes me think of, people say, are there animals in heaven?
right, Yeah.
We don't know.
I don't know.
We don't know, but I have my theory about that.
Do you want to share?
Yeah, my theory
Okay.
is when we go to heaven, that there'll be a new heavens and a new earth, and there could be animals on that earth, and God might let our pets be there.
New animals, quote unquote.
Well, yeah.
Restored, because that's how some
I mean,
interpret
not
that.
that they have souls or anything like that. We don't know for
Right.
sure, but that's just my theory.
Right. All I know is that
He doesn't say there aren't going to be animals on the new earth.
he doesn't say that, but at the same time, I would say don't sweat it too, because heaven's going to be great.
I'm not really, no.
Heaven's going to be great no matter what.
Yeah, the dog won't be with me.
You don't know that.
I think it's interesting that he's the patron saint of animals, or ecologists,
Ecologists,
Saints
yeah.
and merchants.
Merchants,
Where
yeah.
does the merchants come from? It was
His dad.
His family,
Is that
yeah.
it? Is that all it is?
Sometimes the connection is that loose, yeah.
Sometimes the connection is.
Uh-huh.
Mhm. There have been a couple connections we've seen where we're like, really?
The one about beer.
Yeah, was that Benedict? No,
Patron
it wasn't
saint of beer?
Benedict. Yeah, there's a patron saint of brewing.
Well,
Ah, it's gonna bug me now. It was.
sure he's not
She'll look it
living
up.
in Wisconsin.
I don't think he's listening. No.
They're all in the same notebook.
Anything else on Francis? Any questions that I can attempt to answer?
I was wondering until they said about the stigmata, because every picture you see, he's got the stigmata.
Oh, okay.
Looking at that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Again, same question we asked earlier. How much of it is true about him? You know, the animals, let alone the stigmata, or the story about him and his dad. I don't know. Somebody came up with the story, though. I still think the best story we've had so far is St. Nicholas throwing the gold balls through the window. And then they happen to land in the stockings above the fireplace, which is why we put gifts in stockings over fireplaces. He had a great arm, you know.
So, did he also throw coal if they were bad?
I don't remember that. I wonder.
Coal was worse a lot.
Only if they were-
Yeah, yeah.
Any luck, Tammy?
No, hang on here. I'm not done yet.
That's George.
That's George.
I don't think it's George.
It's not Benedict.
It's not Benedict. Oh,
It's not.
this is the one I would.
No, but St. Nicholas was patron saint of pawnbrokers.
Yeah. So
And brewers.
who's that?
There you go.
Oh, there it is.
St. Nicholas.
Really, Nicholas.
Brewers, spinsters,
Alright.
travelers, and pawnbrokers.
He should be the new mascot for Milwaukee.
I think I said that. Or I didn't say it. I thought it when we had him in class. All right. Well, that's what I got for you for this round of saints. Anything else before we wrap up the video? All right. Well, we're going to close now with the video. We won't close with the blessing quite yet because we got more discussion, but we'll see everybody next time watching the video. See you next time.